We are being joined by a guy who I have a lot of respect for. I've watched him rise up the ranks. He does a phenomenal job with pro football, fantasy football, insider info, and I just think he's one of the really good guys in this business, and that's Field Yates joins us today from ESPN. What's up, Fields? How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well, guys. I appreciate you having me on. And Lance, you know, I always love the opportunity to catch up, whether it's on your radio show, on the phone, on the car ride home, you name it. So always good to talk shop.
Here in Houston Field, the optics look terrible. A year and a half ago, you had the ring ceremony. You had the tampering charges. The next day, Brian Gain is fired. Nick Caserio was the guy that they wanted. The Patriots stopped it with the tampering stuff. And then a year and a half later, 2 days after the Patriots end their season, one interview, he's named the GM. It seems like this has been the plan all along, and all the other stuff here is a ruse. What's it look from outside?
Yeah, I would say that you're right there in the sense that this was maybe not the inevitable conclusion, but the most likely conclusion to the wild goose chase surrounding Nick Caserio. And as we know, obviously in the NFL, and like a lot of industries, familiarity is an incredibly powerful force. Nick Caserio and his connection to Jack Easterby is obvious. But I would say that it's not quite just that simple. I think if Nick had landed a job with any other team as their general manager, you would have heard from whether it was Carolina or whether it was Jacksonville or any of the other vacancies, that team just landed one of the most respected evaluators in the NFL. Nick has been, even if not in title, he has been essentially the Patriots general manager for quite some time now, since the departure of Scott Pioli back in 2009. So it's been close to a decade of Nick overseeing much of the scouting operation. And that's why, even though the tie to Jack is obvious here, and that certainly was one of the first seeds planted, I think this is a hire that I think is maybe representative of more than just a connection.
I don't know how much you know about Jack Easterby, if you know him, but do you have an opinion about him being still in the? Because I'm assuming he's still going to be in the building, and it looks like, you know, you just talked about that and refuted some of that, and I think Nick Caserio is his own man, but we are not real happy here in Houston, and I don't know how much you've read about the Jack Easterby situation. I don't know how much you've heard behind the scenes, but the city of Houston is not really that excited about a guy with such limited football, you know, acumen and background making the moves that he made with Bill O'Brien that essentially put this organization in a really bad spot, and yet somehow he's still sticking around. Any opinion of that, or do you know of anything regarding Easterby?
Right. So let me just go back one step, Lance, just to make clear that, well, I don't want to say that the tie to Jack Easterby is not influential in the hiring of Nick Caserio. I do want to say that, like, Nick is not earning the job merely because of his connections, right? Like, Nick was one of the most qualified candidates in the NFL this offseason. So I want to make that part very clear. But of course, the tie to Jack is a big part of that. So here's what I would say about Jack. Jack Easterby is somebody that is suited for a particular role. And it seemed like the influence that he had, and maybe still has, in the Houston organization is something that made a lot of people uncomfortable. And I will just say this, is that people that were either on the periphery of the GM search or people that just were regarded as potential GM candidates down the road were uncomfortable with the role there. That was one of the biggest question marks for this job. But we all know the limitations in terms of some of the roster concerns, and then also the fact that you have no first-round pick, you don't have your original second-round pick as well this year. But the biggest question was, what role does he have in this organization? And while, you know, these people haven't spent time inside the walls of Houston, they've read and listened to a lot of the same stuff that those of us that aren't in Houston and those of us that are in Houston day-to-day have listened to. You need to have a specific role for Jack Easterby, whatever that role may be. But it's worth noting that, you know, his last role in New England, I don't know if there was a perfect word that described all of it, but it was some combination of, you know, character coach, team chaplain, something that's not really the person who's calling the shots personnel-wise and doing contracts. It was a much more expanded role in Houston than it was during his concluding time in New England. And I think if you're Nick Caserio, even if you have a strong relationship, it best suits you to have him in a much more specific role closer to what he was in New England than a prominent football role. Like, I'm not trying to say that you can't develop into a prominent football role regardless of your background, but it's a fast rise to go from where he was a couple of years ago in New England to where he seemingly was this past year in Houston.
Bob Lamont. Okay, both Caserio and Easterby are Lamont guys. Do we look to Brian Daboll as being the head coach because of this Lamont trifecta that we could see?
I do think that Brian Daboll is on the list. It just makes too much sense in my opinion. I don't know that it's simply. I think it's much more than just the shared representation of Bob Lamont. I think it's worth noting on these coaching candidates that there's only 3 or 4 really popular coaching agents. So it turns out that a lot of the people that you're hearing about have Bob Lamont or Trace Armstrong or some of the other coaching agents that are prominent here in the NFL. And I know it's hard to not look just at the Bob Lamont tie in some ways. I would say also that there is a really compelling case for Brian Daboll. If I was his agent, right? He has done an awesome job with Josh Allen. He's done a good job with that Bills offense in general. He's been around the NFL for a long time. He's coached at the college level under Nick Saban as well. So I think there's enough evidence to suggest that Brian Daboll deserves one of these head coaching jobs, that if he winds up in Houston, yes, the representation is a dynamic, it's a factor, but there are a lot of other reasons that I think would make Texans fans really happy. Because if I'm Deshaun Watson, what I care about in a head coach is someone that, A, is going to help fix the culture, and then B, somebody who's got a strong track record with offenses. And this Texans offense probably isn't that far away when you have number 4 under center.
No question. Field Yates, right here on ESPN. Great get, Lance. We appreciate it. Field, thanks for being here. We really appreciate the insight. Phil.
All right, guys. Take care.
All right. There's Field Yates right here, 832 ESPN 97.5. We take your calls on the other side, 713-780-3776.